Comrades, citizens of labor, hear me. Society has erected a monstrous altar where human life is weighed not in the richness of its experience, nor in the depth of its creativity, nor in the measure of its compassion, but solely in units of production. Today, your hours, your strength, your very blood are commodities evaluated, quantified, and reduced to numbers on a ledger. The capitalist, perched upon his fortress of gold, tells you that your worth is your output, that your value lies only in how much you can produce, and that your dignity is a mere reflection of profit margins. This, my friends, is not a law of nature, it is a law of exploitation. It is the machinery of capitalism, refined over centuries, that binds the worker to a life of endless labor, stripping away autonomy, creativity, and human essence itself. In this system, productivity is worshipped, not for the good it might do, but for the surplus it generates for the few who own the factories, the banks, and the means of existence. The laborer produces the wealth, the capitalist consumes it. This is the inequality that is hidden behind charts of GDP, statistics of growth, and the myth of meritocracy. The worker, reduced to a cog in the vast machine of production, becomes alienated not only from the product of their labor, but from themselves. Marx observed that when labor becomes external to the worker, when it no longer belongs to the human who performs it, but to the capitalist who appropriates it, the worker is alienated in four profound ways: from the act of production, from the product, from fellow humans, and ultimately from their own human essence. Today, the measure of human worth by productivity extends this alienation beyond the factory into schools, offices, and even the spaces we call home. You are told to optimize every minute, to quantify every thought, to monetize every skill, as though the sum of your humanity can ever be captured in output. Yet this is not eternal. It is not necessary. It is the condition of a society divided into two opposing classes: those who own the means of production and those who sell their labor to survive. The capitalist asserts that productivity defines worth because it justifies their power. But the truth, the revolutionary truth, is that human worth is intrinsic, not measured by machines or profits. The very labor that capitalism exploits contains the seeds of its own overthrow. Workers of all trades, unite. If productivity has been used to measure your worth, then it is productivity itself that can become the instrument of liberation. Organize. Resist the reduction of human life to mere numbers. The assembly line, the office, the fields, the digital networks. These are not prisons if they are reclaimed by those who labor within them. Only through solidarity, only through collective action, can the working class reclaim control over the conditions of their labor, and with it, the definition of their own human worth. Consider the paradox. The more capital depends on you, the more indispensable you are, yet the more invisible you become to the system that exploits you. They measure your worth in productivity, yet deny your humanity. The factories, the warehouses, the offices, and even the algorithms that track your output are built on your toil, your ingenuity, your life. Every hour you labor, every product you create, every service you render is proof that the working class possesses the power, the creative power, to reshape society itself. The day will come when this altar of productivity, upon which human life has been sacrificed for profit, will collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. It is in your hands, comrades. The unity of the working class, the consciousness of your collective strength, will shatter the chains of measurement and exploitation. No longer will the value of a human being be reduced to what they produce. Instead, society will measure human worth by freedom, solidarity, creativity, and the fulfillment of collective potential. Let us rise, not as mere producers, but as human beings demanding recognition of our full humanity. Let us seize control over the means of life and production. Let the age of human beings, measured by mere productivity, give way to an era in which the worth of every person is measured by the richness of their existence and the freedom of their labor. Comrades, the time is now. The chains of exploitation are forged by the few, but they can be broken by the many. Let us unite, organize, and reclaim not only our labor, but the dignity, the worth, and the life that has been denied to us. Workers of the world, your value is not in your output, it is in your humanity, and that humanity, once awakened and united, is the greatest power on earth. Capitalism, in its most insidious form, has transformed the very essence of human life into a ledger of output and efficiency. Under this system, the measure of a person's value is no longer their capacity for thought, creativity, compassion, or social contribution, but the quantity of goods they produce, the hours they labor, and the revenue their work generates for those who own the means of production. From the earliest hours of industrialization to the present age of digital economies, capitalism has constructed an ideological framework in which human worth is directly tied to productivity, reducing complex sentient beings into mere instruments of economic function. This transformation is neither natural nor inevitable. It is a deliberate mechanism of power designed to maintain the dominance of the capitalist class while subjugating the working majority. By framing human life in terms of output, the system obscures the exploitation inherent in labor relations and normalizes inequality, convincing workers that their survival, identity, and respect are dependent upon their ability to generate profit for others. The worker becomes inseparable from the work they perform, as if their value as a human being can be distilled into units of production, quotas, or measurable efficiency metrics. This has profound psychological and social implications, as individuals internalize the notion that their human worth is conditional, fluctuating according to the capitalist economy's needs and whims. When productivity is high, praise, promotions, and security may follow. When it falters, the worker is discarded, devalued, and rendered disposable. Beyond the factory floor or the office, this ideology seeps into schools, universities, and social institutions, shaping how children are evaluated, how skills are measured, and how careers are judged, perpetuating the belief that a person's contribution to society is synonymous with their economic output. Human relationship. P.S. Creative endeavors and civic engagement are subordinated to the imperative of productivity, as even leisure is monetized or optimized to serve economic ends. The relentless focus on output obscures the intrinsic value of life and experience, prioritizing efficiency over empathy, speed over understanding, and accumulation over community. Capitalism's reduction of human worth to productivity also serves as a tool of social control, instilling competition among workers, eroding solidarity, and aligning personal identity with economic performance. In this context, alienation becomes both a structural and psychological phenomenon. Workers are alienated from the products they create, from the process of creation itself, from each other, and ultimately from their own human essence. Labor is no longer an expression of skill or imagination, but a forced commodity, exchanged in the market at a price determined by the capitalist class. The worker is simultaneously indispensable to production and expendable within the system, a contradiction that masks the power relations underpinning society. Ideologically, the link between productivity and worth naturalizes inequality, making exploitation appear justifiable and meritocratic narratives plausible. The capitalist justifies profit extraction by asserting that those who produce more are more deserving of reward, while those who cannot meet arbitrary standards are deemed failures. This creates a culture in which the oppressed internalize their subjugation, measuring their own value against metrics designed to benefit the wealthy few. Every innovation, every advancement, every technological tool that increases productivity is simultaneously a reinforcement of this system, as it enables the intensification of labor, the acceleration of work, and the extraction of surplus value. Even when workers gain skills, efficiency, or knowledge, the system interprets these gains as increases in output rather than enhancements of human capacity or freedom, reinforcing the idea that utility to capital defines worth. Throughout history, revolutions, labor movements, and social critiques have highlighted this fundamental injustice, yet the ideology persists because it aligns with the interests of those who control wealth and power. The reduction of human worth to productivity thus serves a dual purpose. It legitimizes the exploitation of labor while instilling in workers the belief that their identity and dignity are contingent upon their usefulness to the capitalist machine. In contemporary economies, this phenomenon has intensified with the rise of gig work, digital surveillance, and algorithmic management, where every action, every click, every measurable input is quantified, rated, and monetized. Human beings are monitored as if they were machines, their efficiency constantly evaluated against benchmarks designed to maximize profit rather than human well-being. The psychological toll is immense as workers internalize metrics of worth that are fundamentally artificial, alien, and imposed from above. This systemic devaluation of intrinsic human qualities, curiosity, creativity, empathy, moral reasoning, serves to entrench class hierarchies, justify inequality, and normalize the exploitation of the many for the benefit of the few. Capitalism's obsession with productivity as a measure of worth not only shapes individual consciousness, but also structures society itself, defining laws, policies, educational priorities, and cultural norms around the premise that human value is conditional, transactional, and subordinated to profit. In this way, the system perpetuates a cycle in which people are valued only insofar as they contribute to the accumulation of capital, creating a world in which human life is instrument, allied, and the richness of existence is subordinated to the demands of production and the interests of the ruling class. Workers under capitalism experience a profound alienation that permeates every aspect of their existence, a condition that Karl Marx identified as central to the exploitation inherent in the system. This alienation is not accidental. It is a structural necessity produced by the very logic of private ownership of the means of production and the commodification of labor. From the moment a worker enters the factory, office, or field, they are separated from the process of their own labor. The act of creation, which in a free society might be an expression of skill, intelligence, or imagination, becomes instead a coerced activity dictated by the demands of profit, quotas, and efficiency. The worker has no autonomy over what they produce, how they produce it, or for whom it is produced. The labor does not belong to them. It belongs to the capitalist who appropriates the fruits of their toil. Every effort, every hour, every skill exerted becomes an instrument of someone else's enrichment, rendering the worker powerless and estranged from the very act that defines their existence. This alienation extends beyond the act of labor to the product itself. The object of their labor is no longer a reflection of their abilities, creativity, or contribution to society. It is a commodity, a thing detached from their identity, to be sold for profit in the marketplace. Workers are thus denied the satisfaction and recognition that should accompany creation. They see their energy transformed into goods, services, or outputs that serve the capitalist's interests, leaving them estranged from the results of their own work. This separation fosters resentment, disconnection, and a sense that life itself is being appropriated by forces beyond their control. Beyond labor, and D-product alienation infiltrates the social realm. Workers are estranged from one another, competing under conditions designed to prioritize individual survival over collective solidarity. The capitalist system thrives on fragmentation, encouraging rivalry for wages, promotions, or recognition, while discouraging unity that might challenge exploitation. Relationships between workers become mediated by the market rather than by genuine human connection. Cooperation, shared purpose, and mutual support are subordinated to the logic of efficiency, productivity, and the capitalist hierarchy, isolating individuals from the very community that could empower them. Finally, the deepest form of alienation occurs within the worker themselves. By being separated from the process and product of labor, and by being estranged from peers, workers become alienated from their own humanity. Their capacities, potentials, and desires are subordinated to external demands, and their identity is shaped by how effectively they perform as instruments of production rather than as self-determining human beings. The worker experiences a contradiction. They are alive and capable, yet their life is dictated by the imperatives of profit, their creativity and intelligence harnessed for purposes that do not serve them, and their fulfillment determined by external measures of output. In this state, labor ceases to be a means of self-expression or personal development, and becomes instead a mechanism of survival, a way to meet subsistence while the wealth it generates is captured by another class. The capitalist profits not only from the labor itself, but from the worker's alienation, as estrangement ensures compliance, docility, and acceptance of a system in which human capacities are exploited while human needs remain unmet. Education, training, and professional development are similarly oriented toward increasing the worker's utility rather than enhancing personal growth or social contribution, reinforcing the notion that value is conditional and determined externally. Even leisure, culture, and social life are co-opted into systems of productivity, evaluation, and consumption, extending alienation into the private sphere. Over time, this pervasive estrangement becomes internalized. Workers come to judge themselves according to performance metrics, economic contribution, and social utility as defined by the capitalist framework rather than by their own standards of fulfillment or human dignity. They measure their worth by the fruits of labor that do not belong to them, live in competition with their peers, and experience themselves as instruments rather than whole persons. This internalized alienation perpetuates the cycle of exploitation, making it psychologically difficult to break free from a system that simultaneously enslaves and defines identity. The alienation of the worker is therefore multifaceted, from the labor process, from the products of their labor, from their fellow humans, and from their own essence as human beings. It is both external and internal, structural and psychological, shaping consciousness as much as shaping material conditions. By understanding this alienation, by recognizing the forces that separate them from their labor, their creations, their community, and themselves, workers can begin the journey toward reclamation of both autonomy and dignity. Awareness of this estrangement is the first step toward unity, the first step toward collective organization, and the first step toward dismantling the structures that exploit human life for private gain. It is the recognition that liberation is not merely a redistribution of wealth, but a transformation of the conditions under which labor, creation, and life itself are experienced. Reclaim. Ming the worker's connection to the act, the product, the community, and the self. Under capitalism, productivity is not merely a measure of work or efficiency, it is a weapon wielded to justify the concentration of power and the perpetuation of inequality. The system constructs a narrative in which the ability to produce, measured in units, profits or outputs, becomes a supposed reflection of personal merit, talent, or virtue. This ideology obscures the fundamental reality. Productivity is socially determined, shaped by conditions that favor the interests of the capitalist class, while constraining the working majority. By portraying productivity as an inherent measure of worth, capitalists convince society that those who control wealth have earned their position through skill or diligence, while those who labor are responsible for their own exploitation if they cannot match arbitrary benchmarks. This ideological manipulation serves to naturalize and legitimize the vast disparities between classes, making inequality appear as the result of individual effort rather than systemic exploitation. The capitalist benefits from this construction because it creates compliance and internalized submission among workers. When a person is measured solely by their output, they are taught to equate value with utility to the system, to compete against peers, and to accept hierarchies imposed from above as deserved or inevitable. The language of productivity saturates education, employment, and social recognition, framing tests, quotas, and performance evaluations as neutral or objective markers, when in truth they reflect and reinforce structural inequities. Technology, management practices, and organizational systems are justified as tools to increase productivity, yet the gains from this productivity rarely return to the laborers themselves. Instead, surplus value produced by an effort is extracted by the capitalist, who then interprets the worker's productivity as evidence of their indispensability, while simultaneously denying them proportional reward or agency. Productivity thus becomes a double-edged sword. It elevates the illusion of merit and competence among the privileged, while masking exploitation and subordination among the majority. The worker's labor is quantified, monitored, and analyzed, producing a social hierarchy in which efficiency and output determine access to wealth, power, and recognition. The more productive a worker is deemed, the more they are used, controlled, and exploited, while those whose work does not conform to the system's metrics are devalued, marginalized, or discarded. Capitalism's exploitation of productivity extends beyond the workplace into the very consciousness of society. Social narratives frame industriousness, diligence, and measurable achievement as moral virtues, while idleness, inefficiency, or inability to meet standards is stigmatized. This moralization of productivity serves to distract from structural exploitation, convincing individuals that systemic inequality results from personal failings rather than the design of the system. Productivity is elevated as the ultimate arbiter of human worth, making it appear that economic hierarchies are the natural outcome of labor itself. Yet in reality, productivity is contingent upon conditions over which workers have little control: access to technology, infrastructure, education, market demand, and labor organization. Capitalists structure these conditions to maximize output for their own benefit, creating environments that intensify labor, reduce autonomy, and extract the greatest possible surplus from workers while attributing inequality to the individuals who labor. This manipulation ensures that exploitation appears fair. Inequality seems justified. aid, and the power of capital remains unchallenged. Furthermore, productivity is exploited to divide the working class as metrics and performance evaluations encourage competition rather than cooperation. Workers are pitted against one another, creating a sense of individual responsibility for failure or underperformance, while obscuring the collective nature of production and the systemic roots of inequality. By emphasizing individual output over collective struggle, capitalism prevents the development of class consciousness and the recognition of shared exploitation. This ideological exploitation of productivity is reinforced through education, media, and cultural institutions, which glorify achievement, innovation, and accumulation as markers of personal value. Metrics, rankings, and evaluations infiltrate childhood, adolescence, and adulthood, instilling the belief that value is quantifiable and linked to economic contribution. From standardized testing to corporate performance reviews, every social mechanism serves to equate productivity with worth, subtly teaching compliance with a system that benefits the few at the expense of the many. In this way, productivity is transformed from a neutral measure of work into a tool of power, a justification for inequality, and a mechanism of social control. The capitalist uses productivity to claim legitimacy, asserting that the social hierarchy reflects natural differences in skill, effort, or contribution, rather than the structural advantages and systemic exploitation that underpin wealth accumulation. Workers, constantly measured and evaluated, internalize this logic, accepting their subordinate position as deserved, while the capitalist class consolidates power, extracts surplus value, and perpetuates a cycle of inequality. By linking human worth to productivity, capitalism not only exploits labor but also manufactures consent, shaping consciousness to reinforce hierarchy and suppress resistance, ensuring that the machinery of inequality continues unabated. The path to reclaiming human dignity under capitalism lies not in individual effort, competition, or appeals to the conscience of the powerful, but in the collective action and unity of the working class. For too long, the laborer has been isolated, pitted against peers, and persuaded that survival and advancement depend solely on personal productivity and obedience to the imperatives of profit. Yet the power of the worker is not in isolated toil. It resides in solidarity, in the recognition that those who labor together hold the key to both economic and social transformation. History demonstrates that when workers organize, when they recognize their shared conditions, and when they act in concert, the structures of exploitation can be challenged and dismantled. The capitalist relies upon division and competition to maintain control. By fragmenting the workforce, rewarding some while punishing others, and fostering mistrust, the ruling class ensures that collective strength remains unrealized. Workers labor under the illusion that they are powerless alone, that resistance is futile, that their efforts are meaningless unless sanctioned by those who own the means of production. This fragmentation is deliberate, a strategic tool of domination, yet it also contains the opportunity for revolutionary consciousness. The very mechanisms that separate workers, the hierarchy, the performance metrics, the surveillance, the exploitation, reveal the interconnectedness of labor and the shared dependence of all production upon human effort. When workers come to understand that their labor is the source of all wealth and that the extraction of value from their toil is neither natural nor inevitable, but enforced by the structures of capital, then a foundation for collective action is laid. Uniting workers transforms alienation into empowerment. Shared struggle against exploitation fosters solidarity, a recognition that the liberation of one is tied to the liberation of all. Labor unions, councils, cooperatives, and movements throughout history provide evidence that organized workers can assert power over the conditions of their labor, reclaim autonomy, and secure justice. Collective action also restores dignity because it asserts that human beings are not commodities, that their worth cannot be measured solely by output, and that society has a moral and structural obligation to honor the labor upon which its existence depends. Strikes, protests, mutual aid, and coordinated advocacy are more than tactical maneuvers. They are affirmations of human dignity, asserting the principle that those who produce society's wealth must participate in the control and distribution of its fruits. Worker unity challenges the ideological domination that equates productivity with moral worth, creating space for alternative values to emerge, values that prioritize human flourishing, solidarity, and equity. By organizing, workers reclaim not only control over labor, but also the social recognition that has been denied to them, confronting the narrative that their lives are only valuable insofar as they serve capital. Collective action also serves an educational function, as the process of organizing, strategizing, and mobilizing illuminates the systemic nature of exploitation and strengthens class consciousness. Workers learn that oppression is not a matter of individual failure, but the product of structured inequality. That the struggle is not against peers, but against the mechanisms of control that pit them against one another. In this way, unity fosters awareness, transforming isolated grievances into coordinated demands for justice. Sir, beyond immediate material gains, collective action lays the groundwork for systemic transformation. When the working class unites, it wields the productive power upon which society depends, creating the potential to restructure social, political, and economic institutions in accordance with principles of fairness, equity, and human dignity. Control over production, decision-making, and the distribution of wealth becomes both the means and the symbol of reclamation, asserting that those who create society are entitled to shape it. Moreover, unity strengthens resilience against retaliation as the collective is harder to intimidate, manipulate, or disband than the isolated individual. Solidarity provides not only strategic leverage, but also emotional and moral support, reinforcing the notion that struggle is shared, that oppression is opposed together, and that victories belong to the collective. The moral force of united workers challenges the legitimacy of exploitation, demonstrating that wealth, power, and privilege are not inherent or deserved, but maintained through control over labor. Collective action thus bridges the gap between recognition and reality, linking human dignity to social and economic agency, and transforming abstract ideals into tangible, organized power. In resisting fragmentation and embracing unity, the working class begins to reclaim its humanity, overturning the alienation imposed by capitalist systems and asserting the principle that human life is inherently valuable, that labor is not merely a commodity, and that society must be structured to honor and protect the creative and productive capacities of all its members. Through solidarity, organization, and concerted struggle, workers assert that dignity cannot be granted by the powerful. It must be claimed collectively, exercised through the power of numbers, and safeguarded through shared commitment to justice and equity, establishing a foundation from which both liberation and social transformation can emerge. True human worth is not found in the metrics of production, in the efficiency of labor, or in the accumulation of wealth for the benefit of a few, but in the intrinsic capacities of human beings to live freely, to act collectively, to create meaning, and to realize their full potential in cooperation with others. Capitalism, By reducing human life to a commodity and by defining value in terms of output and profitability, obscures this fundamental truth and alienates individuals from the very qualities that make them human. Freedom, in this context, is the ability to act autonomously, to determine the conditions of one's labor, and to pursue life according to one's own goals, rather than the dictates of profit. Under capitalist systems, freedom is constrained, as economic necessity forces individuals to sell their labor, often under conditions that limit creativity, choice, and self-expression. Workers are compelled to follow schedules, meet quotas, and conform to managerial directives, and the system measures them not by their character, intellect, or moral capacities, but by their utility to capital. True human worth, therefore, requires the reclamation of freedom. The freedom to shape one's work, to participate in decisions about production, and to live without the coercive pressures of economic survival, dictating every choice. Solidarity is inseparable from this concept of worth, because no individual can fully realize their humanity in isolation under an oppressive system. Capitalism thrives on division, competition, and distrust, fragmenting the working class and turning individuals against one another. Yet it is precisely in unity that power resides. When workers organize, share knowledge, and act collectively, they resist exploitation and create conditions in which human potential can flourish. Solidarity transforms labor from a source of alienation into a medium of connection, allowing individuals to assert their dignity, protect one another's rights, and challenge structures of domination. Through solidarity, the working class can confront inequality not as isolated victims, but as a coordinated force capable of reshaping society according to principles of justice and equity. Creativity, likewise, is a central measure of true human worth. Humans are not mere instruments of production. They possess the capacity to imagine, to invent, to problem solve, and to contribute to cultural and social advancement. Under capitalism, creativity is subordinated to the imperatives of profit. Artistic expression, scientific inquiry, and intellectual labor are valued primarily for their capacity to generate wealth, rather than for their contribution to human understanding, beauty, or social progress. The liberation of human worth demands that creativity be freed from these constraints, that labor be organized to allow expression of talent, insight, and vision, and that individuals be recognized for their contributions to knowledge, culture, and community, rather than merely for measurable output. Collective potential represents the culmination of freedom, solidarity, and creativity, acknowledging that human beings realize their highest capacities not in isolation but together. No individual can produce the full spectrum of innovation, compassion, and wisdom necessary for a flourishing society. It is in collective endeavor that knowledge is shared, skills are multiplied, and social transformation becomes possible. When communities act together, pooling their labor, intelligence, and imagination, they create conditions in which every person's worth is magnified, not diminished, by the presence of others. The capitalists say, STEM, by contrast, seeks to suppress collective potential by atomizing individuals, making them dependent on wage labor and turning cooperation into competition. To reclaim true human worth, society must be restructured to nurture collective potential, to create institutions that promote shared decision-making, equitable distribution, and mutual development. True human worth also encompasses the moral and ethical recognition that each person's life has inherent value, independent of economic output. Freedom, solidarity, creativity, and collective potential affirm that value. providing a framework in which human beings are not tools of capital, but subjects of their own destiny. When these principles guide social organization, labor is no longer a site of exploitation, but a means of expression, education, and empowerment. Work becomes a channel through which individuals exercise autonomy, collaborate with peers, and realize imaginative capacities that enrich society. Social institutions, schools, workplaces, governance structures must support the cultivation of these capacities rather than reducing life to a series of transactions or metrics. Education must foster critical thought and creativity. Communities must cultivate trust and cooperation. Labor must provide avenues for both individual and collective fulfillment. By centering freedom, solidarity, creativity, and collective potential, humanity can transcend the alienation imposed by systems that equate value with productivity. Human worth is measured not by how much one produces for the benefit of the few, but by the degree to which society allows every individual to live freely, to act together with others, to express and cultivate creative capacities, and to participate fully in the shared creation of a just and equitable world. These principles define the intrinsic value of human beings, ensuring that dignity, gentry and potential are recognized and protected, and providing the foundation for a society in which exploitation is replaced by collaboration, oppression by empowerment, and survival by the flourishing of human life. Comrades, the truths we have uncovered are clear. Capitalism seeks to measure our worth by productivity, to alienate us from our labor, our creations, our peers, and even our own humanity, to exploit our effort to justify inequality, and to divide us when only unity can bring liberation. Yet within this oppression lies our power. Human dignity is not a gift to be bestowed by the rulers of capital. It is inherent, and it can be reclaimed through freedom, solidarity, creativity, and collective action. The worker who recognizes their strength in unity, who refuses to be measured merely by output, and who asserts control over labor and life itself, begins the irreversible work of transformation. Let the chains of exploitation, the illusions of worth imposed by capital, and the divisions sown between us fall away, for the era of human beings measured by productivity alone is ending. Our worth is intrinsic, our labor is powerful, and our collective potential is unstoppable. Stand together, act boldly, and let the reclamation of our humanity and the restructuring of society begin, so that the world may finally honor the true measure of human life: freedom, dignity, and solidarity among all who labor.